Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Emily Schrader, and coming up in today's newscast. Dozens of U.S. campuses see arrests over illegal anti-Israel protests and, in some locations, violent assaults. Despite weeks of failure, the U.S. is hopeful about a hostage deal, but affirms Hamas is the obstacle, not Israel. The International Criminal Court mulls arrest warrants for Israeli leaders in a move already garnering criticism from the West. Israel will launch a ground offensive in Rafa regardless of the success of truce talks. That was the message from Prime Minister Netanyahu in a meeting with bereaved families and relatives of hostages. 2 IDF divisions stand ready as Israel awaits an answer from Hamas on the ceasefire for hostages deal that would delay the Rafa operation. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed that Israel will launch a ground offensive in Rafah regardless of the success of truce talks. Speaking in a meeting with bereaved families and relatives of hostages opposed to a deal with Hamas that would end the war in Gaza before the terror group has been eliminated, Netanyahu said, "The idea that we will stop the war before achieving all of its aims is not an option. We will enter Rafah and we will eliminate Hamas battalions there, whether or not there is a deal, in order to achieve total victory." The latest offer for a hostage deal being mediated in Cairo reportedly includes a 40-day pause in fighting and the release of almost 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for between 20 to 33 hostages. The numbers relate to hostages in a so-called humanitarian category: women, children, men over 50, and those who are sick. Mediators are still waiting for an answer from Hamas. Israeli negotiators will return to the talks only if the answer is positive. If the answer is negative, the way is cleared for a Rafah operation to begin. IDF forces are already prepared for the Rafah operation. Division 162 withdrew from Gaza after 6 months of intense fighting in the north and center of the Strip. Division 98 ended its prolonged combat in Gaza after 4 months of maneuvering in Khan Yunis. Both divisions are expected to return to Gaza for the Rafah operation, and they are ready.
בשבוע האחרון יצאנו להגברת מוכנות כל הכוחות כדי להכשיר את הכלים ולדאוג להם כדי שיהיו כשירים וקטלניים כמו ביום הראשון לתמרון.
The forces worked on strengthening their competence in preparation for the continuation of the war in the Gaza Strip while learning lessons from the war so far.
Israel Bonds, the heartbeat of solidarity, the powerhouse of support. When the Hamas-Israel war hit, Israel Bonds stood tall, proving we're more than just an investment, we're a lifeline. Investing in Israel Bonds isn't just a financial move, it's a declaration for resilience, strength, and a better future for Israel. Join us and let solidarity echo through generations.
Prime Minister Netanyahu comes out strongly in response to the news that the International Criminal Court is weighing issuing arrest warrants for war crimes against Israeli senior officials and IDF officials. Let's take a closer look. The ICC, International Criminal Court, is tasked with investigating and charging individuals with criminal responsibility for war crimes, genocide, or crimes against humanity. Since October 7th, they've been investigating both Israel and Hamas over their conduct in the war. But now they're considering issuing arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi. This targeting is reportedly coming as a result of pressure from several unspecified states. In response to the announcement, Netanyahu flatly rejected the accusations and claimed the politicized move by the ICC was a distortion of justice and history.
Rather than commend Israel for abiding by the rules of war while fighting an enemy that violates every rule of war, including holding 133 Israeli men, women, and children hostage, who is the ICC targeting? The democracy called Israel. And in targeting Israel, the ICC would be targeting all democracies because it would be undermining their inherent right to defend themselves against savage terrorism and wanton aggression. Clearly, this threat by the ICC is not an attempt to enforce the law. Israel is not even subject to the court's jurisdiction, and it has an independent legal system that rigorously investigates all violations of the law. Rather, this ICC attempt is an attempt to paralyze Israel's very ability to defend itself. The government and people of Israel reject outright this grave threat to our security, this grave threat to our very existence.
Following the discussions of the ICC, the G7 countries have been quietly pressuring the ICC not to take such action as they fear it will torpedo a hostage release deal. The United States specifically also cautioned against the abuse of the International Criminal Court in this case to target the Jewish state. Visiting U.S. Secretary of State arrived in Israel with a message of hope for a hostage deal. He also pointed the finger at Hamas for being the sole party holding up a deal and for continued suffering in Gaza. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
Hamas is to blame if a hostage deal is not reached. That's the clear message from visiting U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, who told President Herzog that Hamas is still holding up the deal.
Even in these very difficult times, we're determined to get a ceasefire that brings the hostages home and to get it now. And the only reason that wouldn't be achieved is because of Hamas. There is a proposal on the table, and as we've said, no delays, no excuses. The time is now, and the time is now long past due to bring the hostages home to their families.
In a change from recent criticism of Israeli policies, Blinken blamed Hamas for the suffering of Gazan civilians.
We also have to be focused on people in Gaza who are suffering in this crossfire Hamas is making. And so focused on getting them the assistance they need. The food, the medicine, the water, the shelter is also very much on our minds and in the work that we're doing. I look forward to discussing all of that with you and many more things as well.
Blinken met families of American hostages held in Gaza before heading to Jerusalem to meet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Blinken was warmly welcomed by Israeli protesters calling for a deal and stopped to give them encouragement.
I just had an opportunity to meet with some of the families of some of the hostages, as I have on every visit to Israel. And of course, as President Biden has done, and so many of my colleagues have done. And I just wanted to share with you what I just shared with them. Bringing your loved ones home is at the heart of everything we're trying to do.
Blinken will also inspect the flow of aid to Gaza from Ashdod Port and Kerem Shalom Crossing. A U.S.-built floating pier on Gaza's coast is expected to be completed later this week. Blinken said the pier would significantly increase the assistance, but was not a substitute for greater overland access.
Iris Chaim has suffered an immense tragedy during this war that words truly cannot describe. Her son Yotam was one of the Israeli hostages taken to Gaza and was mistakenly killed by friendly fire by the IDF. Despite the unimaginable tragedy, she's become a bit of an icon of strength and courage for the people of Israel. I'm here in studio joined by ILTV's Ariella Lahiani, who had the opportunity to speak with Iris and hear her story. Ariella, what can you tell us about this incredibly moving and emotional story?
So last Thursday, I went to Psagot Winery, where every year an event is held by the Fadek family for bereaved families who have lost a loved one to terrorism. And so this year, Iris was there. And amid so many heartbreaking stories there, as you can imagine, she really stood out to me. I mean, talking to her, I had tears streaming down my face, but her strength and resilience, she talked about how, you know, she invited the IDF soldiers to her house and she hugged them and she had them for dinner. And I think it was so insightful and inspiring that at a time where so many people are against us, it's such a time we don't turn our back on each other. We stand together. And to hear that from someone who is themselves suffering so greatly was just, there are no words for it. So I'm
incredibly
looking forward to
emotional.
it.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's take a closer look at Iris's story.
In the 7th of October, my son Yotam Chaim, he lived in Kibbutz Kfar Aza and he was kidnapped from there. He was 65 days in captivity. He released himself and went away from captivity, but after 5 days that he was trying to reach IDF. He was, by mistake, recognized as a terrorist and was shot by IDF and was killed. We decided not to focus on the negative way, but just on the positive way. We sang a lot, we used music, we didn't go to demonstrate in the streets. I thought that it will be enough time to check whose fault it is, but not now. And it's when I saw all the Israeli people raising as one to help each other, to help us as a family that our son is in captivity, I felt Israeli and all the Israeli love. And I was very proud when I saw it. I was very, very proud when I saw the soldiers, how they are running and fighting, just trying to bring my son home. When it happened to Yotam, we didn't know that he ran away. We just knew after he was killed. I chose not to blame the Israeli soldiers, but to hug them. I invited them to my house, to my family house, and we asked them to come, and we wanted to hug them, to tell them that we are not angry about them, that it's all the Hamas fault, and we know that they try to bring him back, but it's a battle, and we don't know what exactly happens there. We are now in difficult times to Am Israel, but we must continue to believe that there is good and that there is light, and if we will look deep, we will find this light. We must believe first, just then we will find it. Yotam was a part of a heavy metal band called Persephone. He wanted to be a famous drummer. Yotam went out of this world as a free person, and I say always that Yotam talked a lot about freedom of the soul, because he had the difficulties, mental difficulties, and I'm very proud of Yotam, and all of the Israeli people and the Jewish people will always remember Yotam with the red hair like David HaMelech, like King David, and he is a part of our history, of the Israeli history.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.
Well, it's been a chaotic week on American campuses where dozens of anti-Israel, pro-Hamas mobs have set up unsanctioned encampments taking up major sections of campuses in protest against Israel. After weeks of warning, specifically at Columbia University, now the police are getting involved. ILTV's William Sharon has the latest.
Last night at Columbia University, intense clashes between anti-Israel protesters and the NYPD took place, and over 100 students were arrested. The students have been warned for weeks to evacuate the illegal protest, which had rapidly turned violent against pro-Israel voices. Not only did the students refuse, but they escalated seizing and blockading and vandalizing a university building, Hamilton Hall, and even holding an employee hostage in the building. The university, which has been harshly criticized by U.S. Congress for the handling of the situation, has stated that the students occupying the building will face expulsion and were given ample opportunity to leave peacefully. These scenes on campuses are not unique to Columbia University, however. Similar protests have popped up on multiple American campuses, garnering bipartisan condemnation from the White House, Congress, and state officials alike.
And our college campuses cannot be used to call for the extermination of any group. Some of the terminologies that were used were just really harmful and despicable. That's not who we are as a country. You can't call for peace by using violence.
President Biden specifically condemned the use of the term intifada at these protests, which refers to violent Palestinian uprisings. In California, students occupied another school building at Cal Poly Humboldt University until police entered and arrested some 25 students. 30 were arrested at the University of North Carolina and dozens more at UT Austin. At UCLA, clashes between anti-Israel and counter-protesters broke out after the school demanded the dismantling of the camp. Violence broke out when counter-protesters tried to dismantle the encampment on campus, which has been used for days to exclude Jewish students and prevent them from accessing key buildings on campus. Several students were injured, and LAPD was not present, as the university wanted to avoid calling in law enforcement. UCLA has stated that the students responsible will face expulsion or suspension.
Absolutely shocking scenes on American campuses, no matter what side of the issue you're on. We should add that the dismantling of the encampment at UCLA did come in response to a Jewish student being beaten unconscious by anti-Israel protesters yesterday. Now, here to speak with us about what's going on campuses is Israeli writer Blake Finlay, also a former student at George Washington University, one of the campuses that we have seen with these anti-Israel encampments. Now, Blake, thanks so much for joining us. I wanted to ask you about the campus scene that we've seen this week. What's behind these protests, and what's your take on the arrests that we just saw?
Well, when you ask what's behind this protest, I think it can best be summarized as, for the last couple of years, student activists have been pinpointing Israel as the face, as the emblem of all that is evil in the world. Every regressive, right-wing, backwards thing that students, especially from my generation on American college campuses, have been trained to hate, Israel has been designated as the face of all of those things. And so what happens is when the news cycle turns to Israel, there is an explosion of hatred and there is an explosion of outrage against Israel. And really, this is a smokescreen for problems in American domestic politics. And we've seen that, when people try to connect Israel to police brutality, when people try to connect Israel to inaction on climate change, when people try to connect Israel to anti-feminism and people being hateful toward the LGBT community. This is all connected. And in regards to the arrest, look, I just think that students who occupy private property and students who shout anti-Semitic chants and hang up anti-Semitic posters should not be surprised when people in their community feel unsafe and when law enforcement has to act.
Now, a lot of people are speaking in defense of these protesters, claiming that they're peaceful, even some members of Congress. What kinds of things have you seen or heard from these protests, and would you characterize them as peaceful?
Absolutely not. I would characterize them as peaceful. And just putting the actual violence and actual physical behavior of the protest aside, like putting up barricades or throwing themselves at police officers, they're not peaceful because of the chants that we've heard from places like Columbia and my alma mater, GW, like Intifada Revolution. Or, there was a sign on GW's campus that said, the students will leave when Israelis go back to Europe. And there is a lot of demonization of Zionists and refusal to let Zionists enter a part of campus unless, they're in agreement with the demands of the protest movement. And obviously that is an anti-Semitic cliche that goes all the way back to the Soviet Union. And so I wouldn't characterize these as peaceful at all. They make members of the community feel very unsafe.
Now, how have they reacted to the concerns of Jewish students? And how does that compare to your experiences as a student at GW just a few years ago?
Well, my experience at GW, and I've written about it and spoken about it quite a lot, was marked by anti-Semitism. Plainly and simply. You cannot characterize it as criticism of Israel. I was called a baby killer by fellow classmates. There was a student who was caught on camera who said, "We're going to bomb Israel, you Jewish pieces of S-word." Various student organizations made demonization of Zionists and Israel a linchpin of their activism, even if their activism didn't concern Israel at all. And in regards to the response from my university at the time, I think it reflects the response from universities now, where there's just this critical misunderstanding of how this rhetoric is used to make us feel unsafe, and how this rhetoric is used to further anti-Semitism, not just on campus, but across the country and indeed the world. You know, you see anti-Israel protests in Europe, which use the same rhetoric and have the potential to actually start violence against Jewish people in their communities. And I think that, you know, this is a free speech issue, but you have to look at the double standard when you talk about free speech and how the universities would not tolerate any sort of perceived hate speech against any other minority group except for us. There is that glaring double standard where we just don't count.
Now, we are running out of time, but I just want to get, if you can answer in 30 seconds, what should be done to stop this?
I think Jewish students need to be confident, and I think they need to be secure with their identities, and I think they need to go onto the quad or go onto the university yard in GW's case, or any space where this is happening, and proudly assert that they are a proud Jew, that they are a proud Zionist, and they won't be intimidated by these tactics.
Blake Finlay, thank you so much for joining us and for your fearlessness in the face of extremism, whether on campus or today.
Thanks for having me.
And speaking of the American Jewish community, in the wake of rising anti-Semitism in the U.S. and around the world, Yuval David visits the Israeli Knesset to hear what Israelis think of the dangerous phenomenon and what should be done to curb it. Let's take a look.
I'm about to step inside the Knesset, Israel's parliament here in Jerusalem, to speak with members of parliament. I want to hear what they have to say about our current situation ever since the massacre of October 7th and the ongoing war, ever since this anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jewish people, has been rising around the world. I'm curious to hear what they have to say. Let's have a walk. Let's have a talk. What is your recommendation and support that you provide for Jews outside of Israel?
As a nation, we are committed to the survival and the prosperity and flourishing of the Jewish nation.
We need to be very clear that we here in Israel, we are sensitive to the spiritual need, the communal needs of Jews in the diaspora, and here we can do better.
לנו יש בעיה מאוד קשה עם האנטישמיות, ואנחנו מרגישים מאוד בודדים. אנחנו זקוקים לעזרה שלכם עכשיו עם המלחמה נגד האנטישמיות.
בדיוק שם נלחמים, שולחים משלחות לארצות הברית, ומנסים לעשות ככל שביכולתנו. תראה, גם כאן בארץ ישראל אנחנו עדיין נלחמים על הקיום שלנו, על החיים שלנו, על המדינה שלנו.
אצל עם ישראל, מה שהמוטו המרכזי שלנו, של ואהבת לרעך כמוך וכל התורה על רגל אחת, זה הדבר המרכזי שמחבר בינינו.
Every Jewish community around the world is representing us, is being targeted as well. It needs leadership to go through these tough times, and we need to speak out. We cannot be silent anymore.
Israeli singer and representative in this year's Eurovision, Golan, has arrived in Malmö, Sweden, despite security threats, for early-stage rehearsals. ILTV's Devil Klein has more.
Israeli singer Golan touched down in Malmö, Sweden, for early-stage rehearsals ahead of the 68th Eurovision Song Contest. Golan's security is on high alert as Israel's participation has sparked immense outrage, with organized protests already being prepared outside the venue. Israel's resubmission of the song Hurricane has granted Israel their spot to compete in this year's Eurovision, despite the negative response from Eurovision fans. The contest, which is predicted to attract some 100,000 visitors to Sweden's third largest city, is also preparing for the thousands of protesters set to storm the streets. Malmö, the Swedish city that is home to over 50,000 Muslims, is buffing up security for the event after months of vocal backlash on social media regarding Israel's participation. Despite these threats, Golan said hours before departure that she intends to represent Israel with pride and show the world, quote, that we are here and we are strong.
Let's take a look at the weather forecast. Cloudy skies are expected around the country tonight, with lows of around 18 degrees Celsius or 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll have more cloudy skies with highs of about 27 degrees Celsius or 81 degrees Fahrenheit. That's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all your devices, check out our ILTV channels, subscribe to our ILTV newsletter, and don't forget to check out our website, iltv.tv, with all the latest news from the heart of the State of Israel. I'm Emily Schrader. Be well, and thank you for watching.